What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And it's been a while since we've done a guide really on any deck in any format, and I think even longer than a Pioneer deck. So today I'm going to be kind of creating this in general overview, this beginner's guide for the Hidden Strings or Lotus Field combo deck for the Pioneer format. It's my deck of choice for the format. I like it for a few reasons, which I'll outline later in this video. Of course, before I get too deep into it and we dive into the list and the ins and outs and all that, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when I post videos, when they go live, etc., so on and so forth. Those of you already subscribed, I really thank you for your support and everything. We've been crushing it here lately, and definitely not being able to upload as often as I want to, and in this really busy month for me. So I just really appreciate all the support, over the last like few weeks. Uh, if you want to support me even further than just subscribing to the channel, there's two links in the description of this video. One goes to a Discord server. Go ahead, follow that link, and go over there and join, as well as a link to my Twitch channel. Go ahead, follow me over there so you know when I go live on Twitch. So this hidden strings list in particular was piloted by Kiorid. I'm assuming that's how you say that. Took it to a first place finish in the Pioneer Prelim, going 4-0. This list in particular is kind of close to the list that I play in paper. I have I think maybe like a few card difference in like Nathan Stoyer's list from the Pioneer Pro Tour. Can't remember exactly which one that was. I think that was like the brother. I think that was Brothers War Pro Tour. But either way, this list is pretty close to the one that I play, or at least like a probably like five handful of card difference. So to get some background, at least like with my experience with like hidden strings and some things I'm trying to add to like these series and stuff like that. I actually played. I've played like the Lotus Field deck in its like current iteration, for the last, however many months, and even like before, like I've committed to like playing a deck. Hidden Strings is a deck that I've been very partial to because I played the deck back in the day when Underworld Breach was legal, and definitely now more so than like the Breach era of this deck, that Hidden Strings is a lot harder of a deck to pilot. With like Breach, like there was just like even if your opponent like tore apart your hand, Breach was like a way that like as long as you just had two Lotus Fields in play, if you ever just drew a Breach on top of like any of your other spells and stuff that dig to find, some of the cards we're going to outline in this video, you just had a way to cobble together a win. And your win conditions were essentially like you'd win with Jace, or I guess you could technically win with Oracle, but I don't think people really like did that. Actually, I don't even think Oracle was out. I think you had to win with Jace. So you had it was just some pretty easy lines of like you end up milling your whole deck. You play, you basically just like do everything you can to try to protect your Jace and protect, your combo win until you could activate Jace and win the game that way. This list in particular, and Lotus Fields after that, when Underworld Breach got banned, definitely has some pretty complicated lines and everything. And of course, just like any other combo deck, being able to understand the ins and outs and whatever are going to be super important and depend on the level of success you're going to have with the deck. So that's kind of my background of it. I no lifed the Breach version of Lotus Field, and while I haven't played nearly as much of Lotus Field with the current iterations of decks as I did the Breach version of decks, I definitely think I have a pretty good grasp on like what you want to like accomplish and how you want to set things up and so on and so forth with the Lotus Field deck. So maybe for those that aren't familiar with it, or that don't quite understand, or what have you, essentially like what the Hidden Strings or Lotus Field deck is trying to do, get this card Lotus Field into play. It has hexproof, so you don't have to worry about getting Field of Ruin, Besaged, blah, whatever. It comes into play tapped, and you have to sacrifice 2 lands. And the draw to playing this card is it adds 3 mana of any one color, so it's kind of like a Black Lotus, or like a Gilded Lotus of that nature. And typically, like you want to get 2 of these into play. You can just naturally play 2 Lotus Fields, but that does take a while, even if you have like 2 Arboreal Grazes in play. That's just not really fast enough. So there's this convenient card called Thespian Stage, which lets you pay 2 mana and tap it to become a copy of target land except it has this ability. So, you know, you're able to like have Thespian Stage copy, you know, any of your other lands, maybe if you just need like specific colors and things like that. But a lot of the time, Thespian Stage is going to copy the Lotus Field, and by it copying the Lotus Field, it doesn't have the trigger to sacrifice 2 lands, so you just essentially get like a Lotus Field for 2 mana, and of course tapping the stage. And essentially the win condition from there is the easiest one is casting Emergent Ultimatum. Emergent Ultimatum lets you search your library for 3 monocolored cards with different names. You exile them. An opponent chooses one of the cards. The chosen card gets shuffled in, and you cast the others without paying their mana cost, and you exile the ultimatum. So this is like one of the easier ways of doing it because you're able to. I mean, all the cards in your deck are like monocolored except for the ultimatum itself. A lot of the easy piles that people make or that you can make is just like grabbing Omniscience, a Leer, and like a Behold the Beyond. And essentially, like most of the time, they're going to give you like the Omniscience, because giving you like Omniscience plus Leer, if you have like mana open, you know, if you have like 2, 3 mana floating, and you know they decide to give you Leer and Omniscience, that essentially means that you're going to be able to like untap your lands. You're going to get like you're going to build up a ton of mana. You're going to be able to cast some of the other cards in your graveyard. Pour Over the Pages being one of the most important ones. Lets you draw 3 cards and untap 2 lands. Conveniently enough, with 2 Lotus Fields, then we get some net mana from that. And in like those piles and like those scenarios, like at that point, then like your cards that you're drawing from the Pour Over Pages get to be cast free from like the Omniscience. So typically that's why like Omniscience ends up going back into the deck, and then you end up getting like a Leer and Behold the Beyond, which then means that like any of the cards that you discard, Leer is probably going to be able to flash back. And on top of that, you're going to be able to get 3 fresh cards. Chances are being able to get like maybe another Emergent Ultimatum, a Mastermind's Acquisition if you're ready to go get any of the cards from the sideboard, which we'll go over later when we get to that point. You're able to even go get like maybe a Baral if you need the mana reduction of 0 Tumbling Sand. Just other ways to like generate mana. You're probably gonna get a Pour Over the Pages as well, just because again this is one of the best cards to have in the deck and one of the best cards like to draw, so on and so forth. So that's really, I mean, really kind of going over most of the spells and like why you play some of them. Dig Through Time, it can be just like a cheap, you know, way to just dig. You know, you basically can find like whatever pieces you're missing. You're missing the Emergent Ultimatum. You're gonna get to be able to dig 7 cards plus a draw step to go find an Emergent Ultimatum. Sometimes you're able to even cast this card for 2 mana and then able to generate enough mana to cast an Emergent Ultimatum. This deck definitely, once it hits a critical mass of cards, has no problem generating enough mana to kind of do whatever you want to do and win the game in some way, or at least like put your opponent in such like a bad position that they need a very specific subset of cards to actually win the game. You know, you have like impulses and shimmer possibilities. Or a shimmer possibility essentially being the sorcery speed version of impulse. Both let you get to look at the top 4 cards of your library and put one of them in your hand. The rest go on the bottom. Impulse is in any order, and shimmer possibilities in a random order. You know, for what it's worth, that's essentially where like the the similarities kind of end between the 2 cards. You have Sylvan Scrying, lets you search your library for a land card. In like the base level, the Sylvan Scrying is going to allow you to go get like a Lotus Field if you're missing it, or a Thespian Stage if you're missing it. However, there are some like utility lands in the deck. You have 3 Boseiju, you have 2 Otawara that you play. There is a breeding pool in here. I've seen people playing like the, I think it's the Spears Headquarters, or maybe not that one. Essentially playing like the Bant Triome as like a way that like you can cycle off of it if you need to. I mean, 5 mana to essentially like draw 2 cards in a way is like not very efficient, but you know, you do what you got to do. You'd see like decks like in the past playing like Sheltered Thicket and some of the other like cycle lands that cycle for 2 mana, but you really don't have any of the. There's not a green blue one that exists, and the green white one like doesn't really do anything for you. Just really important having like green and blue on like a lot of your lands and stuff. Sylvan Scrying, kind of the role it plays. Boseiju is able to break up like some of the annoying like hate pieces that you can find, even like mess with like your opponent if you kind of catch them slipping on their Lotus Field. Uh, And by that I mean like if you have a Thespian stage and a Lotus field, if you have the ability to copy it right away while your opponent's tapped out, just do it. A lot of the time, like if you just wait till they have open mana, and especially if they're a green deck that could play Besage you, and you try to copy it, it doesn't happen instantaneously. Your opponent has a chance to respond. They could just blow it up with some kind of land destruction effect, with Besage you, whatever, and then like you're essentially back to square one of trying to get a second Lotus Field into play. Whew. So essentially, like going over the rules of a lot of these cards, like. Or at least like the spells and stuff. So they all kind of like put in overtime and like definitely knowing when to play these spells and what you have to do to essentially get maximum effectiveness out of it. Well, that's important for like any deck that you play is getting the most value out of like your cantrips, getting most value out of your like critical spells and stuff in the deck. In this deck in particular, it is definitely really easy to kind of make not necessarily misinformed decisions, but just making suboptimal decisions without really even knowing that you do it if you don't have the necessary reps in to play this deck. And there's even like times where I just make that mistake, either out of like just ignorance, not thinking about it, or I, just misreading the situation and stuff like that. So definitely important to get your reps in with this deck when you can. There are creatures in this deck, and they all serve an important role in the deck. Even if even like Arboreal Grazer isn't a card that looks exciting, for the uninitiated, but Arboreal Grazer will help you ramp. Like on turn one, you already get 2 lands into play. Then you're able to like play a Lotus Field, obviously on turn two. You're able to like float the mana, and you're able to maybe cast like a Sylvan Scrying to go get stage or a Lotus Field, and then like play the Lotus Field, sack the 2 lands, and you're already halfway there. You're able to cast like Shimmer a possibility, which is probably better than casting Impulse, just because Impulse you can cast on your opponent's turn. Shimmer you don't have that possibility, no pun intended. Uh, you can also cast like a hidden. There's like some ways that like you can go off like if you float the mana, but then you play in a Boreal Grid stuff like that. But chances are you're not going to be like going for something like that, or like cycling a Vizier Tumbling Sands, which can allow you to generate additional mana with your Lotus Fields. Like every time that you cycle a Vizier Tumbling Sands with a Lotus Field in play, you're essentially generating 1 blue mana or one of whatever mana, as long as you have a blue in your pool to actually be able to cycle the Vizier of Tumbling Sands. So this can definitely be a decent like starter if you just have extra mana. Plus, it essentially just turns into a new card, which again, like when you are able to generate tons of mana with this deck, the kind of like the ceiling is like uncapped essentially. You have Baral, Chief of Compliance. This one just getting to be a cost reducer for a lot of like your spells and things like that. The second ability doesn't like come up, but Baral does make going off on the same turn possible. Since you do have a reduction in cost of your instant sorceries, you're able to say like on turn 3 or turn 4, because you have to have a turn to play the Brawl, but like on turn 4, you have like a Thespian stage in play and just a Lotus Field. You add 3 mana with the Lotus Field. You activate the Thespian stage, and you have 1 mana left over. Since Baral makes instant sorceries 1 less to cast, it's able to cast like a Hidden Strings with the extra blue mana floating to untap both the lands, and from there you can cast Pour Over the Pages, which now nets 2 mana instead of 1, which allows you essentially to draw into an Emergent Ultimatum that turn and play it, which, again, like having and knowing those situations where you can go off with less material is always good and always important to remember, and kind of just understanding your outs. Like obviously just because you cast a Pour Over the Pages doesn't mean that an Emergent Ultimatum is going to be one of those 3 cards that you draw, but just being able to recognize and understand like how you can kind of chain spells together to get to the result, and the fewest amount of spells to get to that result if that result were to happen. Is always important to know, and Brawl just kind of opens up a lot of like what the deck can do from there. There is some versions that we're playing like Hope Tender, which essentially like pays one and taps to like untap a land. And I believe if you like add mana with like Lotus Field and you hidden strings to untap the Hope Tender and a Lotus Field, and you already have a Lotus Field in play, you're able to kind of generate more mana. And I want to say even like Hope Tender in a way can like help you sort of kind of like be at parity and stuff like that. I have played a little bit with Hope Tender, but not like that much to be that confident on it. But Hope Tender is definitely an option, and there is times where like you're able to exert it to untap both your Lotus Fields that you just made, and essentially play the same role that Brawl did. Just over the long term, Brawl does generate more mana with the more spells that you end up casting. So Brawl, while not really flashy or anything like that, and obviously not a card that you want to like play to be on like blocking duty, and you could be in a bad position if you have to. But that option is there, and it's just overall like a very good card for the deck, especially if it gets to live for a turn, and definitely live for the turn that you get to go off on. Leer is the other like the one of creature in this deck that is just really important and definitely is worth its weight in cardboard. Spells can't be countered. Kind of good for you, if you're able to actually like get this into play. Uh, Really, a lot of the time, like against like the control decks and stuff, you're just kind of hoping to build a critical mass of cards and just kind of like find a window where they kind of slip up and you're able to like jam enough spells to win. And Lear can definitely do that by giving each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard flashback and essentially just being able to cast it for whatever its mana cost is. Lear can allow you to keep going in lack of a better terms. Like you drew like two pour over the pages, and then you play a Lear, you have two more pour over the pages. It makes these Bolligate recoveries a little bit better for the fact that if you play like a recovery to get back a pour, and then you cast a pour, then you're able to flash back the Bolligate recovery to get the pour back into your hand to cast the pour again, and you essentially get to cast the same pour over pages like 3 or 4 times before you had to exile it. And just getting to see 12 cards is definitely a good way to make sure that you see like an emergent ultimatum, or maybe like a mastermind's acquisition to get one of the cards from like your sideboard and stuff like that, or finding more ways to untap your mana and just generate more card advantage to where you can then get to that point where you are casting your win conditions and are winning the game. Lear also makes going for one of the main win conditions like possible in the Approach of the Second Sun win. So this is where we'll go over like the sideboard cards and stuff, since we kind of already went over some of the emergent piles. So Approach of the Second Sun says that if you cast it from your hand and you've cast another spell named Approach of the Second Sun, you win the game. Otherwise, you put Approach of the Sun into its owner's library, 7th from the top, and you gain 7 life. So essentially, with like Approach of the Second Sun, I mean, you need a lot of mana. It's 14 mana to like win, plus getting 7 cards deep. But Lear makes it pretty easy because again, like she makes it able to cast, your pour over the pages multiple times to cast like shimmer possibilities and impulses and stuff like that to dig that deep. And then if you have just like even like some hidden strings lying around, like 1 or 2 of them, you're able to definitely generate enough mana, and you really only have to tap a Lotus Field once for white mana to have enough mana to cast Approach of the Second Sun twice, at least to meet the color requirement. So this is definitely one of the, to me, like one of the fun ways and one of the most nostalgic ways of winning the game is with Approach of the Second Sun. I just love this card, and I definitely like that it's the, at least to me, like one of the win conditions of choice for the deck. Some of the other ways that this deck can like function and does very well is playing with the sideboard and having different ways of winning the game in the sideboard, but also like prolonging the game and just giving itself the best chance to win. So some of the other win conditions: Dragonlord Dramoka, the spell can't be countered and your opponent can't cast spells during your turn. uh, it's a big creature against like aggro decks. This can kind of be the death knell, because it's just a 5/7 flyer. It's huge. Lifelink. Your opponent like tries to attack. They're going to need to get very fancy if they're going to get through a Dragon Lord Jamocha and even get it off the board. Because I mean, even if you block one of their creatures, chances are you only take like 1 or 2 points of damage, and then you're able to like attack and gain that life or whatever, or just stay back on defense and just kind of build back up to a point where like you're able to actually go off and win the game, or you could just end up winning the game with Dragon Lord Jamocha because your opponent is just going to be unable to actually beat through a 5/7 life linking threat. The other one is a Kama Primal Calamity. Vigilance, Reach, Trample. So I mean, while it doesn't like necessarily gain life, it does have the option to pay 3 mana to gain 3 life. Which is very relevant in a lot of matchups, and especially being like vigilant as well. You're able to get in for huge chunks of damage. You're able to block some annoying flyers, and really your opponent's not going to be able to deal with it for the fact that it's a 9/9. It's huge. It also gets to untap all lands that you control if you cast it, and really like 99% of the time you're casting it. Actually, I think 100% of the time. I don't think there's a way to put it into play, you know, without like necessarily casting it. But it has 3 abilities. It can deal 3 damage to a target creature, it can destroy target artifact or enchantment, and you gain 3 life. And in each scenario, like against like aggressive decks and stuff like that, where I think you would initially want a card like Zakama Primal Calamity, it definitely does very well. You could just gain 6 life, 9 life when this comes into play, and then from there, I mean your opponent's gonna need like multiple cards if they're like one of the Atarka red decks, mono red decks, whatever, to try to beat you after you just gain 9 life and you have like their biggest creature checked. On top of that, just like the next turn being able to pick off their board, or if you're at high enough life total, you can already start picking off their board with the red activated ability, and essentially have any other uh, cards like checked by destroying target artifact or enchantment, which is like a lot of the time, like what's a lot of time is like what Beseiju ends up checking anyway. You have some Wraths in the sideboard. Supreme Verdict, just being uncounterable, destroy all creatures. Definitely a good pickup for the Spirits deck. Because a lot of them like to play the Supreme Phantom, or not Supreme Phantom, the Mausoleum Wanderers and stuff like that to counter them. And while you kind of want Sunfall for those, just because you'll be able to create an incubation token that can end up being a big creature in like some of those matchups. Supreme Verdict is like kind of checking off the boxes of just making sure that like when I go and get this card and I play it, it is going to resolve and it is going to add hopefully multiple turns to what I have left to be able to piece something together. And as I just mentioned, Sunfall is just exiling all creatures, already very good against like certain decks, and being able to make a creature equal to the number of creatures exiled this way can just sometimes just be a win condition on its own. Mystical Disputes, something that you can bring in, something you go tutor for if you need to protect, maybe an Approach of the Second Sun or protect like an Emergent Ultimatum, just kind of at that point checking off all the boxes. Anger is like another Wrath, that can just exile all creatures that would die. Maybe if you're a little bit shorter on mana, the Anger of the Gods is totally fine option. This is something that you could cast like with 2 Lotus Fields and like another land in play, searching go ahead and like search it up and then cast it off of like 1 Lotus Field. Voyaging Satyr, playing like the role that like Hope Tender did, just not requiring mana to activate, also just having an extra point of toughness. You have Terra Sunder, which can get an artifact or enchantment, or if you're able to kick it, which more than likely you're able to, you can exile just target non-land permanent straight up. Pithing Needle to just name like just annoying like planeswalkers or something like that. Overall, like I guess some things with sideboard because I did have some written down here. Sideboard, there's some people that have played like Ugin, and I think you see Ugin a lot more with the like Fae of Wishes, like kind of sideboard plan as well, which is like an option that you can take, but obviously the deck doesn't really need that to do what it needs to do. But if you're so inclined, like Ugin is like another good card that you can put in the sideboard. For that, the Wraths in general, like I think Supreme Verdict and Sunfall I mean, I think are just kind of like prerequisites now. Like just having an uncounterable Wrath and a Wrath that can sweep away the board and then also leave something behind to where like this could just be a win condition in itself is very powerful. If you feel like you need other wraths, other different wraths, I mean, there's just like tons of 4 mana ones that you could play in the format as well. So definitely, if you don't have access to these ones in particular, you do have other options. Just you kind of will be sacrificing some amount of like percentage, depending on how prominent like uh, aggro based decks are and how like counter based decks and stuff like that in those scenarios. Overall, some of my final thoughts on this deck to wrap it up because I am going pretty long, of course. This deck will definitely reward you being heavily familiar with the deck and just having a general knowledge of like the format and the deck itself. So just what I would recommend for any deck, but really especially this one, play as much as you can before you take this to like tournament. Definitely like jam it at like F&M, jam it, with your buddies, with your friends, uh, and even like goldfishing with the deck as well. There's definitely some scenarios and stuff that I've discovered while just goldfishing to where it's like, oh wow, like knowing that I kind of have like this setup or just something like this. If I just have these cards, like there's like a way that like I can go and go off and win on like turn 3 or turn 4, which a lot of the times can be the difference. Pioneer has some brutally fast decks, and they have some other like methodical decks in the format as well that will kind of either tear apart your hand or just require you to have specific cards to be able to survive long enough to actually win the game. So definitely just get your time in. This deck will heavily reward you for that familiarity, for that knowledge of the format. So just be sure to put the work in. And I hope this beginner's guide helps anybody who wants to get into playing the deck because the deck is really sweet. It's a lot of fun to play. I definitely enjoy it more than I probably should, just because it is kind of like I wouldn't say necessarily like a feel bad deck because like when you're playing it and it's going off, it's awesome and you just kind of play Magic for 5 to 10 minutes while your opponent watches. But I can definitely see where it's miserable on the other side. So definitely worth playing. And yeah, that is the beginner's guide for the Hidden Strings / Lotus Field combo deck for the Pioneer format. If y'all enjoyed, please, of course, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, and ring the notification bell so you know when videos get posted. And of course, there's 2 links in the description of this video as well. One to the Discord server, one to my Twitch channel. So be sure to join the Discord server, follow me on Twitch. This deck list in particular will be down in the description of this video as well, along with like any other deck that I usually go over. I put the deck list in the description. I don't know why I never like say that and why I even thought about it now, but if you're interested in looking at this deck in particular, the link will be in the description of this video as well. That's gonna do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.